Okay, everybody, I'm going to kick us off for the one and only SEFS Seminar for this quarter. And it's a special one because it relates directly to our own campus and our own collection of trees here at UW. And I'm pretty excited to introduce. Before I introduce, I want to encourage everybody to join us on March 10th for the Sustaining Our World lecture. Ray Wynn Grant will be lecturing about, I don't have the title, something about ecology, evolution, and intersectionalities in conservation. And that will be presented both in person in Kane Hall and streamed live. So please RSVP if you've hopefully received an email invitation on the many different platforms. Please RSVP and join us. But for today, I'm excited to introduce Theo Hoss, who is a very recent graduate of our program in environmental sciences and resource management. Theo is going to be presenting on a project that he worked together with Thuy Liu, who's also here in the Zoomosphere with us. And some 2 years ago, I guess, we announced the option for a capstone project to take a look at the Brockman Tree Tour, which has been on campus. I'm going to miss the details, but I'm sure Theo has some of the history here to share with us. I'm not going to try to guess at the date, but it's been on campus for many decades and developed by an esteemed professor here in the College of Forest Resources. And over the years, some of the trees have been removed or died. And we wanted to also bring the primary source information was in a booklet. And we were interested in updating the tour, updating the ways in which it could be presented and accessed. And Theo and Thuy took that project on with gusto. And we're really grateful for their work and really excited for the product that has come out of that, updating it in many ways that I know that Theo is going to describe. So thank you, Theo. Thank you, Thuy. And really looking forward to hearing the update. And it's a sunny day, it's a little chilly, but if after the talk you want to feel inspired to go out and enjoy the tree tour, please do. Take it away, Theo.
All right. So pardon me if I'm a little bit slow on the Zoom. And also my apologies for not being there in person. I woke up this morning with a cold. So kind of the perfect day for that. Bright and sunny, and I get to be inside. But anyway, thank you guys all for being here. Thank you, Dan, for that introduction. And as was mentioned, this is a product of almost 2 years at this point of work on it. So really exciting to be sharing it with everybody. Starting off, I'd like to do a quick land acknowledgement for the Coast Salish people, especially the Duwamish, who have lived on the land that UW now occupies for thousands of years. As we also heard a little bit in the introduction, this is not really a major research project, which I know is kind of one of the things that we often see in the seminars, but something that I still think is really applicable to everybody who's here today. And that's something that everybody can enjoy. And I hope that all of you guys leave today and go and share it out with other members of the community, since it's now hopefully more easily accessible than ever before. So let's see. I clicked in a way that it should have skipped slides, but looks like it's not doing it again.
You might need to click on the screen of the presentation so that.
Oh, perfect. That's it. Okay. So very brief introduction of myself as a tree story for myself. This book right here, Trees of Yosemite, was created by my great-grandmother back in the 1920s. So trees are something that's been in my family for years. It seems like every generation has someone who's really nutty about trees, which is awesome. And they've kind of done a very good job of passing that down over the years. So I grew up in Southern California. This is in my backyard there. It's a California sycamore tree. And I might be mistaken, but I'm fairly confident that just about everybody has a tree that at some point in their life was very special to them. Most places in the world have trees, and those that don't, people will bring trees there. They're really special beings. This one, my brother and I spent a lot of time playing under growing up, and of course, climbing up there to heights that I'm sure would be absolutely terrifying to my parents, but were just wonderful for myself. And growing up in California, we lived in an area that was oak woodland. And since we were kind of out in the country, this is a look out in my backyard, we had to drive into school. And so growing up in that way, I was able to decrease in elevation every morning on the way to school and see the trees kind of drop away from the landscape. It's very arid down there. And so there's a lower limit to the tree line. And so seeing that every day was kind of the first impression I had of trees really defining the world and the ecosystems that we live in. And that's something that has come up more and more as I've studied environmental science and started looking at the world through that lens, is seeing how much these life forms really impact every ecosystem that they're present in. So through the years, finding lots of big trees and arriving at college today, absolutely thrilled 5 years ago when I came to UW to find out that we had our own historic tree tour on campus. And I actually remember my freshman year dragging my mom out on it and kind of going around and looking on the trees, which was really fun for both of us. She's the one who kind of initially started teaching me the trees down in California. So the Brockman Memorial Tree Tour, for those of you who haven't heard of it until today, if there's any of you in this room, Zoom, that haven't, no shame in that. One of the things that we've been trying to do is spread the word, so now you do know about it and you can tell other people. But brief overview, it's a walking tour of significant trees on campus. And that exact date of the original tour was 1980. And it was originally released as the University of Washington Tree Tour. It's been hard to find an original copy of that tour, but this is a revised one off on the side here, a photo of the one that you can actually pick up still down in the Anderson Hall office, as well as at the Botanic Gardens Library. And so that original tour was produced by Professor C. Frank Brockman of SEFS, or actually back then, of course, the College of Forestry. And it's been revised several times over the years, with the most recent revision in 2010. It was converted to a website format in the late 90s, and that website was updated in 2010, but it looks like a 1990s website. So one of the goals was to remedy that issue. A brief overview of Professor C. Frank Brockman. And this is the man for whom the tour is named, and so he deserves to be in this presentation, not only for that, but also because of the really impressive impact that he had both in Washington and in the whole country in general, in terms of connecting people with the natural world. So we can see here from this pretty impressive resume that he has. He went to school, not first at UW, but in Colorado, and then came out here to the West to be a park naturalist in Mount Rainier National Park. And in that capacity, he was actually really instrumental in getting a lot of those visitor centers that are still there today built, and a lot of the programs for educating the public about the outdoors in place. And during that time, while he was working full-time as the park naturalist, I think the second one in Mount Rainier, he got his master's in forestry at UW, and then transferred down to Yosemite National Park from 1941 to 1946. And down there, he was doing a lot more with research in the park, but still overseeing the really impressive park naturalist program that they have there, where the goal of that program is helping people to engage with the natural environment. Once he returned to UW, he was a professor there specializing in outdoor recreation. And he also produced The Trees of North America as his kind of capstone achievement in 1968, just after he retired. And that was really the true golden guide up until very recently in the early 2000s when they've done a revision. So, and of course, there's the UW Campus Tree Tour, which he produced in 1980 and was named in his memory in 1985 after his passing. So kind of the overarching theme here to Brockman's work is him seeing that the natural world can be seen as a lens from which we can learn, and doing his part to allow people to learn about the outdoors, not just from kind of the sterile sanctity of a lab or a classroom, but with actually physically engaging with those species out in the environment, and doing it in a way that's actually fun, that people want to do as recreation. So the campus tree tour is an awesome metaphor for that. So 40 years later, because it's actually now 42 years later, big changes, of course, and one of those is tree losses. We're a pretty dynamic campus at UW, and this is one of the original maps from the tree tour, and these X's on there were added during a revision in the early 2000s, where all of those trees had actually been lost by that point. And of course, the campus has changed since, just looking at some of the locations of buildings and some of the buildings that are now gone. But that was still in the early 2000s. This map is the losses of trees between the last revision and when Twee and I started looking at these at the trees on campus and trying to revise this tour 2 years ago. So in total, the tour had started out as 81 species, and we were down to 60 of them, of the original 80 that were left. Unfortunately, with the revisions that had taken place before, those trees hadn't been replaced. So we had a tree tour with 66 trees on it, but 10 of those trees were just completely missing. They were still on the tour in terms of a pamphlet form, but they didn't appear on the map and you couldn't go visit them. So that was one thing we wanted to look at. In addition to that, some of the pre-revision issues that we were seeing were out-of-date scientific names. That's something that genetic science since 1980 has, of course, come a really long way, especially in the sense that we now have the computers to do really in-depth genetic analyses, and that has allowed us to come up with a lot more accurate phylogenies. We are able to see which families trees belong to in a way that we couldn't before. So we've had to change some of our scientific names. One example I can think of off the top of my head is the incense cedar that's on our tree tour is now Chalcedrus. That was not the case until the 21st century. So inaccurate scientific names. In addition to that, we've got a lot of unused common names that were appearing, and in one case, a really inappropriate one that was actually a slur against Native Americans. So obviously things that we really wanted to correct. In addition to that, for those of you who haven't been tracing the internet, it's changed a lot since the early 2000s, and website formatting technology is very different. So we wanted to make a more accessible interface that really was more aesthetically pleasing, that didn't kind of look like a one of those library guides where you're looking through for your book and it's just text and that's it. We also had a lack of in-depth uniform botanic information. So this tour was really great for recreation. But in terms of its potential for teaching, it would have been very difficult to go in and try to do just a fun class on it or a field trip with it, because each tree had a different thing. You might get what a leaf looks like on one of the tree descriptions in the old tour, but then the next description would have nothing about what the leaves look like. It might not even say that it's a deciduous versus evergreen tree. In addition to that, we had no indigenous acknowledgement in any way. This is something that Twee and I talked about and that we particularly wanted to remedy, because most of the trees on this tour are native to North America, and the indigenous connection there goes really deep, but in many cases, there's a lack of focus on that, and the fact that these trees were not discovered by the largely white botanists that came along in the 17 and 1800s, and some of which bear those names now. These are trees that have been known to humans for tens of thousands of years. So where possible, we have cut out common names that honor a botanist and gone for a feature of the tree in common name. And in addition to that, we've tried to add more historic information related to indigenous practices around the tree, as well as indigenous names for the Pacific Northwest ones where possible. And then, of course, in terms of major shift, where UW, the College of the Environment, kind of mirrors the larger world, there's been a huge change in the focus of how we manage our environments over the last 42 years. Of course, looking back to when Brockman designed this tour, we were the College of Forestry. And nowadays, there's a lot more focus on understanding environmental impacts and trying to work through in a sustainable manner than there was 42 years ago. So going a little bit into why we want to preserve this tour, I'm sure that everybody who's pushed for this has had reasons for sustaining it, but for myself personally, I think there's an intrinsic value in this, and I hope that's something that a lot of people find. But we have a historic tree tour that's already developed. So one reason to preserve it is it's fairly easy to do at this point, and hopefully the way that we've designed it can keep it continuing in a way where it's easy to maintain for the future. But we didn't want to lose that we already have. In addition to that, UW is the forestry school of the United States. Although our forestry program is not the oldest, I do recall reading that the first forestry class in the entire country was offered at UW right about the time that the first College of Forestry was established back on the East Coast. So really in-depth history with that. And we also have over 480 species on campus and 9,000 individual tree species. So putting that a little bit into perspective, there are 28 species of tree native to Washington State, and we have over 480 on campus. Exciting news with that is that UW has more species of trees on campus than just about any other university on the West Coast. The only other one that claims more is U of O, and they're cheating by throwing their arboretum into that count, which I think is unfair. So we win in that sense. And so I think that this tour is a great way to look at that diversity. And that actually does tie into the long-term focus on trees and forestry at UW, because the reason that we have such a wide diversity of trees is a lot of the original forestry professors back, especially in the early 1900s, were planting these trees as an experiment to see if they could thrive in this region and to observe their growing habits and have them here as a living laboratory. So it has been used for that living laboratory and research and student projects over the years. Kind of doing brief web searches over the last 2 years, I've identified at least 10 separate projects where it was used by students for including the most recent one with the information school, where they planned out what an app would look like for this. In addition to that, it's been cited in research over the last 40 years, less frequently in modern times, but appearing in scientific journals. And we also have a lot of potential for growth on this tour. Other universities do maintain tree tours, and they have been able to develop programs around those tours. Stanford has some really great ones. They do guided tours all summer long. So good stuff with that. And then last but not least, the importance of trees in teaching sustainability. So we talked a little bit about how the world has changed in the 42 years since this tour was developed and where SEFS has changed with that. Focusing on sustainability, we have 3 billion more people on the planet than when this tour was developed, and a lot less resources. So the words here in the first couple points on this slide are actually from our own Dr. Peter Kahn and his work around environmental psychology. So there's a lot of increasing ecological unconsciousness, which has kind of led to a general withdrawal from the natural world. That's something that we have seen as people have moved more into urban settings, and especially with the technology boom of the last couple decades, people kind of tuning out this world that we have been interacting with in what Dr. Kahn would call an interaction pattern, and engaging with that environment. So an interaction pattern, as a summary, is something that is built into our very evolution. It's something that humans have done for not just tens of thousands of years, but hundreds of thousands. Things that really connect us to that environment in a way that is kind of more animalistic than the human ideology world that we've built for ourselves. So the interesting thing with that is that a lot of research has shown that those kinds of interactions can lead to awareness and are a significant factor in creating natural connectedness, and that natural connectedness actually goes towards increasing sustainable behavior. And that's been shown multiple times over the past decades, is that people who are more connected to their environment and natural setting are more likely to make decisions that are beneficial for the environment and more sustainable. It also allows for a greater topophilia, which is a new word that I learned while doing some research on this a couple weeks ago, and it's highly correlated with mental health. And of course, that's something that in the past 2 years, especially, a lot of us had to come to grips with, is looking into our mental health. So quality of life improves when you interact with your environment, and this tree tour is a phenomenal way for people to do that. In the modern world, we live in a very urban place here. UW is a significant green space here in Seattle. And especially with COVID, the need for outdoor learning opportunities is really critical. A lot of us have been stuck inside quite a bit over the last couple of years. So moving on to our renovation beginnings as a brief overview. This started as a capstone, as Dan mentioned, as a partnership with Twee and I, and we've kind of moved beyond that at this point, with the primary goal being an overhaul of the website and conversion to digital. One thing we did find with that is that in our initial work, what we were hearing from a lot of people was we don't want it just to be digital. So shortly here, hopefully within the next few months, we will still have up-to-date printed guide booklets available for people. And we'll also have printable materials on the website so that people can print off a guide to the tour. That way you don't have to engage with the tour being reliant on technology. You can turn off your phone and your computer to go on the tour. So that is something that we heard and that we listened to, and that'll also be available. Our initial steps were a community survey. This is just a couple of it was a very basic survey to kind of get what they needed, what we wanted to have for the community moving forward. One thing we found was that a lot of our respondents were faculty and staff. Student engagement is something that I have been focusing on since we started working on this tour, trying to get people who are students to know that it's there. It's hard because they're turning over every 4 years, so word of mouth is a difficult way of sharing that. I have really appreciated the Society for Ecological Restoration in sharing this tour with their members, who I think are then going out and sharing it with the broader community. That's been a great way of getting student involvement. And then also there's quite a few people who have never been on the tour before or even heard of it. So kind of trying to increase the amount of people who at least know about it has been a key factor as well. And then in terms of what the tour has been used for, personal recreation was the overall main usage for a lot of people. And that's really awesome. I know that Dr. Brockman would have been really happy about that. That was his main goal with it. We'd also hoped to improve with this renovation, though, all of these other things, allowing it to be used for UW coursework, for professors to have the ability to use this as a resource, for other people to have as examples for their own projects, and in addition to just help people answer their personal questions and learn a little bit more about their environment. So hoping to make this a more evenly distributed bar chart, but still keep personal recreation as a key use. So putting in the updates, Tree Gain. This is our new website as compared to the old map here. This map makes it really easy. One awesome thing, we used Google Sites for this, and Google Sites is really compatible with phones. So it's not just something that can be accessed on your computer. This map can actually be opened on the Google Maps app on your cell phone. And as you can see a little bit off to the left on the new map here, each tree has a summary. So you don't have to go with the full in-depth page on it. You can just walk it opened on your Google Maps app and have a summary of each tree as you go around, and you can click on each tree. It'll also, of course, have the little dot that represents you on the map so you can see where you are relative to the trees, as opposed to this older map where it's just, you've got the map, and if you're lost, hard to find out where you are. Additionally, this is something that'll make it easier to maintain in the future. You can just log on to the website and change one of the trees if it gets cut down or gets diseased or something. As opposed to on the old map, if it's in print form, it's not going to be changing. You'd have to redo the whole thing. So that was very exciting to have that. In addition to that, this slide is called Tree Gain because we added enough trees to get us back up to the full 81 species on the tour that was originally there. That was something that we wanted to do kind of just for historical purposes. Functionally, this tour is best broken up into a couple of sections. It's a long tour if you do all 81 at once. That being said, it is really fun to do the whole thing, but you really have to be into it. In terms of picking those new trees, we wanted to maintain the original loop, which went around campus starting at the Anderson Hall bus shelter. That track makes sense because it's easy to finish where you started from the standpoint of if you parked your car there, you have easy access to get back, you're less likely to get lost. And the original loop is a very pleasant 3.5 miles. So not a really long walk, not too short of a walk. We also wanted to replace original trees that had been lost. So some of the trees which had disappeared from their original location over the years had other specimens on campus. Those were one of our first priorities for choosing. We also wanted to add more native species. The original tour was mostly exotic in nature, so a little bit more of a focus on our Pacific Northwest diversity. And then West Coast natives was kind of the next criteria, especially drought-tolerant species, leaning towards a world where Seattle, Washington is going to be a lot warmer in the summer times with a lot less rain. The UW grounds is already focusing on shifting plantings of new trees towards ones that are more drought tolerant. And so selecting for those kind of trees is kind of guaranteeing that they will be able to be maintained on the tour in spite of the things that we've been seeing in recent years, like our drought last summer that brought on that big heat wave. So that was our focus there. And then we've got this old format on the website to the new one here. We like to think that it's a lot more navigable without making it too big of a shift. It's still simple enough to follow very easily, but we also have, again, this map on this side. You can interact with the map, zoom in, zoom out, click on each individual species. We've also got access to the search bar up at the top. And then we've been able to maintain the actual original format in a sense too, so it hasn't gotten too complicated. The new website has a lot of really exciting features on it that we'll get to in a second, but as an overview of fully updated tour, we've got back up to the 81 species. We've added new campus tree tours as well, including a native trees tour that has all but 4 of the tree species that you would find in the state of Washington. We have a tree identification vocabulary resource. Basically, that is a website page that tells the reader what the terms that they're going to be finding when they're identifying trees actually mean. So if I were to say chordate when I was describing a tree, that would absolutely just confuse the heck out of everybody who I was leading the tour to. And they'd look at me really confused. And then I would have to go back and I would have to say, oh, chordate just means heart-shaped. So it's a heart-shaped leaf. That resource on the website allows anyone who's not getting a guided tour to go back and check on that and see what it means when a leaf is described that way. We've tried to keep it fairly accessible to the public in terms of our terminology, but this is kind of an extra little step for anyone who wants to go a little bit deeper. We also have in-depth and up-to-date fact sheets. Historically, the tour has included summaries of each tree, which we've also included, but they weren't detailed enough to include information about every aspect of the tree's physiology. So our fact sheets are very uniform. All of them have information about reproductive bodies, bark, leaves, the general shape of the tree, how big they can get to, make sure that it's consistent from tree to tree. We also added on the historic tree of the day fact sheets that used to be found in Anderson Hall. Pending an update to a new computer screen, those were going to be taken down. And so each one of those, if you guys are familiar with them, are now accessible on the website. If you're not, they're really cool. It's over 160 fact sheets about different trees from all over the world that were also compiled by Brockman. In addition to that new website, we have more information about indigenous usage as well as the native Lushootseed names that can be found for the Pacific Northwest species, especially, and have included those on there. And again, this is available both for PC and mobile, so it negates the need for the development of an app because the website can actually be opened on any operating platform, making it easy to get to no matter what, as long as, yeah. So anyway, easy to get to. So how to use the new campus tree tour. My plan at this step is to do just a brief walkthrough. I put the QR code up there in case anyone wanted to scan it onto their phone. But navigating to the site, I'm just going to show off a couple features of the new website. So here we go. So this is the new website, flashy title page. Scrolling down here, this opening page here, we've included our brief introduction and our land acknowledgement. We wanted to make sure that the acknowledgement included the fact that the names of a lot of these species have been associated with people who didn't in fact discover them, and that these trees have been used for thousands of years by the indigenous people of whatever area they're from. One key critical point that we learned while doing this was that a lot of these trees actually have moved into their present ranges since humans have moved in there, and that they've developed not as a primary part of a culture, but have actually been imported into cultures that exist prior to their appearance in an area. One example of that would be Western red cedars here in Washington, in the Puget Sound region. Western red cedars didn't actually start showing up here until about 6,000 years ago. And the indigenous people of this area had already been living here for 4,000 to 6,000 years at that point. So some interesting looks into how humans have interacted with trees over the thousands of years. How to use this tour, that's a brief summary that anyone who wants to go on and check it out later can check out when they're actually doing the tour. But here we have the actual new tour map. As we can see, we can zoom in on it, click on it, and here we have our summary. Over on this side, each one of these will open up to a tree profile page. Our tree profiles are those uniform fact sheets that we wanted to make available so that people can really get an in-depth look. If you wanted to just do the tour really fast blast through, the summary is a really easy way to do that. But if you wanted to go and look at more of the tree from a very scientific standpoint, we've got the direct scientific measurements of what you would find as an average in terms of the phenotype of these trees. And we've also got new photos. One of the hallmarks of the old tour was original 1980s photography from Brockman, and that was in black and white. So we have a photo of the tree as it appears on the tour. This is one of our deodars. It's tree number 1, right out by the bus shelter. And in addition to that, we've got a photo of the leaves and the bark for each tree. And where we could, we also got a hold of a reproductive body. So in this case, it would be cones. But cedar cones are difficult to photograph because they break apart before they come to the ground. We've also added range maps where possible. And we've included the historical tree tour information as it would have appeared on the original tree tour in that booklet. So that has been preserved for people who prefer the old summary format to the new one. In addition to that, we have our new additional tree tours. These ones are much less in depth than the Brockman tree tour, but as an example, this one is our native trees of Washington State. Native tree tour is a lot smaller and it actually initiates up at the Burke Museum, but it does include a fairly in-depth look at a lot of our Washington State natives. As an example of the tree profile page for the Alaska yellow cedar, one thing we've included is the indigenous names for these. we wanted to make sure that that was something that was incorporated as a key part of these trees for the Pacific Northwest in terms of making sure we're better understanding the human connections with this land going back a long ways. That is something that'll be really important in terms of understanding future sustainability, is understanding how it has been sustainably managed in the past. And we've included a lot of that in our historical background in terms of indigenous uses, whereas different era, the School of Forestry 1980s Brockman Tree Tour, the quote unquote uses section was purely timber uses and what it could be used from that perspective. This one will include non-timber uses from clothing to medicine to edibility. Although we have a note that nobody should eat any of these without looking a little bit more into it on their own, of course. So in addition to the Native Trees Tour, one of the features that that was asked for was whether we could have a comparative tree tour of different tree families. So one thing that a lot of people will find difficult when they're trying to identify trees is that some trees look a lot alike. So for example, on campus, we have both incense cedar and Lawson cypress. Those two trees from a distance look nearly identical. They have similar bark. It's both, they have similar colors. They have similar cones. And so what we've developed here are a couple of tree family tours. They don't have in-depth fact sheets about each tree, but they have the locations of each tree within a particular genus around campus so that people can go and look at different trees that are closely related to one another and spot out for themselves the differences. So the ones that we have right now are the oak family tour. We have 28 species of oak on campus, and then we have a pine genus tour as well to allow people to kind of go around and compare. Those two are some of the better ones to practice on in terms of identification because they have a huge variety of diversity within their genuses. So that's a fun new feature of this website. And then we have a more in-depth Brockman biography, if anyone wanted to check into that a little bit more. And then, of course, our tree of the day. Right now, I'm still working. I've entered a lot of Google Sites forums over the last couple of years, but this one's really flummoxing people as a question. We're trying to figure out how to make this still be a tree of the day, where you click on it and it will come up with a tree of the day. That's still in the works. For the time being, they're available in alphabetical order, all 160 species that were in the original tree of the day. And it's a simple upload of the original fact sheets and photos and range maps that could be found in Anderson Hall and at the bus shelter historically. So that is a general overview of the tour. I'd really encourage everybody to check it out a little bit more in depth. We've tried to make it so that it would be really easy to use on the tour itself. And that would be where you would want to open it on your mobile device. And again, in future times, having a physical booklet available, that will be an option. And there's already a map and just list of the trees that can be printed out as a PDF on the website at this time. So jumping back to final slides in the PowerPoint. My apologies. And current slide. So looking into the future at this point, this project has, again, taken 2 years to get to this point, but we're coming out with something that hopefully is going to be more easily maintained in the future. We've already begun initiating a campaign to get more people aware of the tree tour. This seminar is part of that, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody about it and the project and the history. But we've also been doing guided tours, and I'm hoping that there will still be the opportunity to do a few more of those before the year is out. But starting in future years, the Society for Ecological Restoration has agreed to work with us to try to take on this as a maintenance project and kind of keep it going, watching for changes on campus like missing trees and hopefully being able to keep guided tours going and events around the tree tour. So that would be really exciting, and I'm looking forward to working more on that. Additionally, I found out yesterday that we've been added to the Seattle Tree Walks website. This is not the only tree tour in the city of Seattle. There's actually a city-sponsored website and group that maintains tree walks all over the city. So we've been added onto that. Additionally, we received a grant from the Campus Sustainability Fund to apply Arboretum tags to all the trees on our tour. And so we'll be doing that, and they're going to have tree information as well as a QR code. So we're hoping that opens it up to people who might not otherwise stumble upon it. Those will be hanging in each of the trees. And then hopefully incorporation into UW courses in the future. That's a question mark one. I'm hoping that there will someday be interest in that as a feature. With the Native Trees Tour, that one is one that, if not incorporated into a class itself, would be a phenomenal resource for anybody who is in SEFS, who has a class where they do have to memorize native species or learn identification practices for those here in the Pacific Northwest. It's all right here on campus, which is the coolest thing about it as a living laboratory. And you get to do all of that stuff outside as you're doing that, which it rains here, but that's part of the thrill. All of these, the Arboretum tags, having these updated maps and the photos of the trees is something that hopefully makes it really easy for people to find these trees as well. When Twee and I originally started this and we were trying to figure out which trees were missing, we were having a hard time finding the trees that were there sometimes, just because of the way that the map was originally designed. This is something that now should be in a place where anybody could go out and actually find each one of them to within a couple square feet. So that's exciting. And then as a very hopeful, helping solve climate change and the mental health crises, in terms of getting outside and engaging with the environment, this is a tour where I could not believe when I started leading it as a guided tour how into it the people who are on those tours were. It's been very exciting for me to get out and realize that there's other people who are that into trees, and see how excited people can be just kind of not just seeing something really interesting, but seeing something really interesting that has been there the whole time, and suddenly realizing its value. Most of the people who have been coming on those tours have been related to the SEFS major or the College of the Environment, but we've had a couple of people come in who were in business majors and a lot of engineering students as well. And so seeing those students interacting with these trees on campus and getting a little bit of that topophilia, that feeling of a sense of place and the value in the land that you're living on, has been really cool for me. And so I really do think that tours like this can be a solution for helping people have a more sustainable mindset in the future and breaking the boundary between majors with having fun, recreating around our green spaces, and getting the higher quality of life that goes with that and being outside and interacting. So I'd like to acknowledge the people who have really, really pushed on this. Twee and working with Twee was phenomenal, getting through all of that stuff. Best tree tour partner I could have asked for. It was really awesome to work with Dan Brown and Molly Hoddle. Both of them have done a phenomenal job of not just pushing us to pushing for this project to happen, but also allowing us to kind of roll with it and play with it quite a bit, not just having it stuck into a box of what was accomplishable. We really appreciate that. I'd also like to thank Jen for working through our financial stuff with Campus Sustainability Fund and the Campus Sustainability Fund itself for funding our Arboretum tags and the broader College of the Environment community. I'd also like to thank UW's Grounds, who we worked with a little bit in terms of the location of trees. There is a phenomenal tree GIS map of the entire UW grounds with every tree on there that the grounds is constantly working to update and is getting more accurate all the time. But it's a great jumping off point for identifying not just the trees on this tour, but every single tree on campus, all 9,000 plus of them. I'd also like to acknowledge all the people who've kept the tour up over the last 40 years, especially Susan Helmuth, Jock Reynolds, and Arthur Lee Jacobson, who kind of were instrumental in the last renovation, and all those people who have encouraged me to really have kind of a maniacal love for trees all of these years. And with that, I am open to any questions that anybody might have about the tour or its history or trees on campus. Yeah, so the first question of what is topophilia? Sorry, that is a term. I wrote down the exact definition because I predicted that that one might be something people asked about, and lo and behold, I forgot to say it. So topophilia is the connection that people have to their land. It's something that, as a historical human trait in evolutionary terms, is really important. But that's something that we kind of lost over the years in terms of removing ourselves from that land. It's the emotional and mental bond that we have to the physical environment around us. So one way to describe it might be as if you have a place that you grew up going for really fantastic family vacations, and that every time you go there, you just get a really good rush of adrenaline and all these good feelings. That would be an example of topophilia. It's a very strong connection to a particular geographic location.
You have another question in the Q&A?
Cool, yeah.
Do you include the metal tag number the facilities puts on trees?
No, and that was actually very specifically talked about. Our tags are very separate from that. They still have their own facilities tag number on that tree. We're not removing that or touching it in any way. Our tags are specific arboretum tags, and they're going to include just scientific name, common name, indigenous name, and then a QR code to access the tour.
Any other questions? So 81 trees is a lot. How long does it take to actually do the tour?
Right. As a guided tour, 81 trees, which I discovered the first time that I did it, is about 4 hours. That is a little bit of a high estimate because I can talk about each of them for about 30 minutes, and that's me being that's me not pushing myself for it. For someone to walk it on their own, from what I have heard, it takes about 2.5 to 3 hours. And that's just kind of reading the bare summaries on each tree. In terms of cutting it into pieces, half the tour is a nice, easy 1.5 to 2 hours. And so that's kind of what I have moved towards in terms of the guided ones recently.
It seems like the structure of having it as a digital map would allow you to just drop in at any time and look at trees as you wish too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of a hope of mine is people walking to campus from their dorms would be able to, like, as they're passing, kind of just open it up and see things that are on their route to class, not just as kind of they have to start at Anderson Hall after they've picked up the physical copy of the map, being able to come in like that.
Great. Any other questions in the room? We have a few people in the room on the Zoom. Here we have a question from Carrie. Will you be offering guided tours for the campus community in the coming months?
I'm hoping to. I haven't set any dates yet. And I need to figure out, generally, SER has been the primary body advertising for that. So yeah, getting on their mailing list is a good way to hear about that. And I'll also check into other ways to get the word out about that. But yes, definitely hoping to do more guided tours in the future.
And Carrie suggests the Whole You program might be a way to get a tour advertised and organized.
Perfect. Yeah, that would be I will write that down now.
Great. Seeing no other questions, I'm going to say thank you, Theo, for all your hard work and for your maniacal dedication to trees and for all that you've done in updating. Oh, we have another comment. Libraries has used trees for dog days, and I know that you did some work with that, right?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. Dog Days was awesome. They included it as part of their historic campus tour this most recent year. And we also had some special guided tours for Dog Days. So that was a cool one because I think pretty much everybody who was on those tours had never heard of the tour before Dog Days. So awesome way of reaching new freshmen as they're coming into campus.
There's a question about the facilities database that has detail on tree height, diameter, value, etc. Do you import that into the tour information?
That can be accessed through the website. That website is maintained by the grounds. It does include that information. It's not consistent for all of the trees, and some of that information might be a little bit out of date depending on when it's been last updated. But there will be a link to that on the website. I took it off recently because I was modifying the page that it was on, but it should be back up on there within the next week on the website.
Great. Thank you, Theo.
Sorry, I was going to go further on that one. It can be accessed just the way I initially can find it is a simple Google search of UW trees GIS map. There's a whole bunch of campus GIS maps of different features on campus, and it will show up on that page.
Great. Well, hope you feel better.
Thank you.
Thanks for the talk and thanks for your work on this.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.